I'm Asyia Kazmi. I lead the Girls Education Challenge Programme in PwC, which is a £300 million programme working in 15 countries. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But my background is in UK education. So I started off with a maths teacher. I worked in the Department for Education, and I was a senior HMI in Ofsted, as well as a senior education advisor in DIFID.
Hello everyone, my name's Richard Marett. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Whizz Education. We were founded on the belief that every child deserves a learning experience that caters to their individual needs and pace of learning. And we now work with stakeholders in education to facilitate that and achieve learning outcomes around the world. We've had the pleasure of working with PwC and DIFID in a number of areas. Talk more about that in this session.
So one of the things I've committed to this year is whichever forum I'm in, I'm going to mention assessment for learning and look at people's starting points. So if you can raise your hands if you've worked in an international development capacity before. Okay, that's good. I think that we've pitched our presentation right. What other question were we going to ask about? What kind of background?
Hands up if you're private sector, NGOs, schools.
Okay, cool. So what we were going to do in this session is to give you a little bit background of where education is in the international development sector and what donors are looking at. Give you some avenues to explore where you can find further information and how you can engage with it. And the reason this session came about is I used, as a team leader for a challenge fund, we had a call for proposals, and we went through 11 global locations. We had thousands of applications, but I don't think there were many from this sector. And so we said we will do this session to raise awareness and get more of the fantastic work that's being done here in the UK to consider opportunities abroad. So 2015, the Millennium Development Goals finished, and then there was a call for Sustainable Development Goals. And goal number 4 is about education, ensuring equitable and quality education for all. And goal number 5 is about gender equity and empowering girls and women. Most of the 17 goals have something to do with education. We all know education is a no-brainer, and it creates everything else that can happen. So the focus on the international community used to be very much on getting children into education. You have 263 million students, children worldwide out of school. Of those who are in school, 250 million can't do basic literacy and numeracy. So there's an enormous focus now on improving the quality of learning. Particularly looking at literacy and numeracy. And some of you will argue education cannot just be about literacy and numeracy. I think the counter-argument, it should at least start with that, and we know the best do all of the other things. So in the international development sector, the other big idea now is leave no one behind. I mean, it's always been there, but there's a much stronger focus on leave no one behind. So we're looking at the most disadvantaged, the most marginalized children, those with disability. Girls are a big factor because they are behind in accessing education, and they are behind in learning outcomes as well. And then also looking at fragile and conflict-affected states, where it's much more likely that children are going to be out of school, and much more likely they're not going to be able to learn. And I'm focusing on these things because when you are considering engaging in the international development sector, you have to be thinking about these aspects and considering what you bring to it, how is it addressing these points. And then there's a recognition that EdTech and innovation in EdTech can contribute in addressing the learning issue. How do donors work? So they work in very broad ways. So but the main areas that they work are, for example, having a call for proposals, and it might be bilaterally. So DIFID, Department for International Development, the UK government department, saying that we are working in this country, and in this country they will decide that they want to maybe focus on girls' education, or they want to do system strengthening, or they want to do governance, and they will prepare a business case, and then a tender will be issued. Now those are quite big tenders, so it might be something like from 10 million to 100 million, 300 million. And the people would apply for it in consortiums. So for example, I mean, we at PwC, we will say we bring fund management, we bring governance aspect, we want to partner with an organization that will bring real quality teaching and learning or social development aspects. So it's about partnerships. Then there is the challenge fund, so I should have started with challenge fund, which is saying, here is a pot of money, we are going to go out to the market and we're going to ask for proposals, and those are more manageable in size for smaller companies. So for example, in the girls' education, when it was launched in 2012, we had more than 1,000 applications, and we whittled that down to 37 projects. And this is where Whizz Education came in. And just
maybe I can add to that actually. Whizz Education got involved in the Girls' Education Challenge over 3 years ago, and when we first applied, we were frankly a small company. We still are, but we were smaller. At the time, probably only about 30 or 40 staff, and we thought twice about whether we should even attempt to participate. And I think one of the takeaways for people in the audience today is don't feel that this is just for the largest organizations. If you're a school, I think as long as you have designed educational programs in place, there's different ways you can approach that. Asyia mentioned the consortia a moment ago. That's a great way to participate. It's the way we did, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But as a school, there's often an opportunity to twin with some of the communities where we see marginalization issues, twinning with schools that can give something back and contribute and gain so much out in the process. So whether you're an NGO or a private sector or even an individual school, you're not excluded here.
So this shows which are the countries that the girls' education is working in right now. We are reaching 1.4 million girls. We're helping, and we have a very rigorous evaluation of their literacy and numeracy outcomes. We can say 840,000 girls have achieved more in the Girls' Education Challenge than outside of it. And in Kenya, we've got 6 projects working. One of the projects was Avanti, and they bid to the fund to bring internet to remote areas. When we, as the fund manager, looked at this and thought, well, where is the learning aspect of it? Where is the pedagogy? Where is the teacher training? And where is the subject level content? And that's when we encouraged a partnership of Avanti with Whizz Education. And they brought a more sort of personalized subject-specific focus.
And I think that's right. When you're thinking about engaging with donor organizations, whether it's DIFID or someone else, really start your thinking, where's the learning? Where's the learning impact? As is very clearly stated, that's what they're after. And so they're not necessarily after just having inputs, products or technologies or skills, but how does all that come together to achieve learning impact? And so when we sought to engage with DIFID 3-4 years ago, look, there's still an element of capacity that you need to have to participate. So sometimes partnerships help to bring that combined capacity, but sometimes it's your combined value add. So we were connected to Vanti, who were putting infrastructure into, in this case, schools in 200 rural communities across Kenya. But that's great. Where's the learning impact going to happen? And so we provided that. Well, that's what we're about. We're that last mile of learning where the impact happens. And so that partnership formed, and we were able to participate and make some really interesting things happen.
So you'll see there some household names, Save the Children, VSO, but you'll also see people like Education Development Trust, who are formerly CFBT, and each of those main partners have a consortium that they've put together, or some of them have a consortium that they put together and say, we are applying to this fund as a group. So what are the big areas on the Girls' Education Challenge in particular that we focus on? We've looked at things like economic intervention. So if we think of a broad family, what are the barriers that girls face to get into school? And those barriers are sometimes overlapping with the barriers boys face. So the biggest barrier is they're too poor. They're too poor to afford to send the children to school. So we do economic interventions, which might be giving bursaries, it might be paying for books, it might be paying for uniform. It might be actually setting up loan schemes, and we've got an organization that gives loans out at very low cost, and they've got incredibly high rate of return on them. Return rates of those loans. We're looking at understanding what causes girls to be marginalized from education, what causes children to be marginalized. And the equivalent here is when we're looking at pupil premium kids and we're looking at disadvantaged children, what are the factors and how can they be overcome? Personal development, what is the aspect that the children themselves need to be able to be confident, happy learners, and what's the family personal development, what's the family and the community doing to make that better? And then we get to the reducing violence. So children sometimes face violence in school, sometimes they face violence on the way to school, and sometimes they're in violent environments, in fragile and conflict-affected environments. But what we want to talk a little bit more in detail about is some of the ed tech initiatives that we have in the GEC. So we heard about Amanti and Whizz Education. We've got Varki that is doing things like beaming through broadband maths lessons. And those maths lessons are being, you've got kits set up in remote villages, and they're learning from both the teachers are learning about good lesson modeling and the children are learning direct content subjects. And then we've got things like just proper teacher professional development. How do you teach maths better? How do you teach English better? How do you teach early literacy and older children? And we also have vocational education, which you heard about in the earlier session. We're going to, at the end, leave about 10-15 minutes for discussion. But if you've got questions way through, feel free to interrupt us. So the challenge fund concept, what we had is we're as a fund manager getting a lot of information about what people bid for and what are strong bids and what are weaker bids. So we go to the market, we say this is what we want. We did some workshops to explain in more detail what we want. Then we had a call for concept notes, so very short, 2-3 pages, because when you're having thousands of applications, we don't want to give people days and days to spend time on something and then not being successful. And then it goes to the full proposal stage where we're looking at your organizational, we're looking at what you want to do, we're looking at organizational capacity, your capacity to manage amounts of funds. And then we assess them, do you understand the context that you're working in? Have you got a partner that understands that context if you've never worked in that context before? What is your theory of change? So when I was a teacher, I went into a school where it was really low learning outcomes. My theory of change was really teach them good. And when you teach them really good, you're going to have higher learning outcomes. And that's a bit of a brief, very brief theory of change. And we will want more detail about, you want to do this, because you're putting this in, this is the impact it's going to have, this is the outcomes, these are the results. So a little bit more detail about the kind of activity you want to do. We want a very strong focus on outcomes. By doing this, what difference are you making? Or was it in Ofsted, we used to say, so what? You can describe your activities, what is the impact of those activities? And then value for money, and that is not just about how cheap is it, it's about what difference it's going to be making, is it reaching the most marginalized, and we understand when you're going into further areas, it costs more to reach the most marginalized. And then funding modalities. You can have grant funding where we give you where the donors give you funding and we measure that you're spending it on the right thing, we check that. It could be match funding so that we give half, you give half, and we look at the impact. Or it could be seed funding, that you have an idea, it's going to be sustainable, you just need some money to start off. So, Richard, you wanted to talk a bit more of that?
Yeah, our organisation's a private sector company, so with our engagement in DIFID, we were match funding. So that can be in-kind contributions, where you're putting people's time up towards a project, or it could mean cash investment sometimes, or, depending on what the nature of your products, a reduced pricing of some kind, so that there is a way of making projects viable, but understand, for this to make sense for your organization, I would say one of the key things that it needs to be aligned very well with your organization's strategy. Do not approach this thinking this is just a funding source. I think this is this aligned to your strategy? And then work with DIFID to see how a good idea can be financed. In our case, our mission is to empower communities around the world to fulfill their potential through individualized learning. So engaging in rural contexts in Kenya, where we were going to face some very, very challenging situations, aligned very well. Why? Because we wanted to push our position as thought leaders in that space of deploying innovative education technologies in a wide variety of situations. We knew that those tough environments and the many hundreds of obstacles we were going to face were going to make us a better organization, make our products better. And as such, making that investment in our organization's time and in terms of priority made sense. Finally, what I would say, and that leads to that point there, is funding is going to get you started. It's going to make initial things possible. But from as early as you possibly can, start to think about how is the project you're doing, how is the program you're doing going to A, scale, and B, self-sustaining? If you're a private sector organization, how can you make it commercially viable over the long run? It's not easy, I've got to tell you. If you're working in rural communities, chances are you're not going to be charging the end users in this case. So you've got to find really innovative ways of making this happen for the very long term. But it is possible, and that's why I think that's an important part of the design, and it's something that I think Asyia will back up that DIFID and PwC look at when they're evaluating proposals.
So a big win for us is you've got an idea that we tested out, and then we showed that it works, and then the government of Kenya says, we're really interested in this, we're going to take it on board, and we're going to try it in the district, and then we're going to roll it out nationally, and there you've got sustainability.
To give you another example of how sustainability might happen, is it might facilitate you setting up an operation to support these programs, and then you sell commercial services to other subsectors of the market and make your operation self-sustaining so that you can support these kind of programs. So there's different ways you can do this.
So sources of information, how do you know what's going on, and how do you get yourself together or partner with others to actually make bids for this? You can Google all of those links. So DIFID has its own. DIFID has its own development tracker where it shows that new opportunities are coming out. By the time of summer, by summer 2018, DIFID is going to release a call for proposals for an EdTech opportunity. And Mandeep Sharma sitting at the back there is from DIFID, so I'd encourage you to talk to her at the end of this session.
Put your hand up, Mandeep, so they can see you.
So that EdTech opportunity will be looking at testing out things and researching how EdTech in these sectors work. There's also the DevX website, Bond Development Aid, and all of these are comprehensive list of opportunities that are there. They'll be across different sectors. They'll have mailing lists. Some of them might cost to register on there, but it'll give you information, and some of them do matchmaking as well. So you might say, I can do something amazing in mathematics. We need somebody who does amazing in literacy and then understands this context, and then you become a good, strong consortium. You have a lot to offer. So for example, shortage of maths teachers, shortage of physics teachers, we know about that in the UK. The same applies in the international development sector. If you've got an amazing idea of how to train teachers on their own time to be able to teach these subjects, we want to hear from you. If you've got an amazing idea that can get children to learn very, very quickly, I mean, you're talking about 263 million children who are out of school. Some of them are going to be older children. So can you get innovation where, say, 3-month course, they're going to be able to do the basics? We'd love to hear about that. Do have a strong focus on inclusion and equity. So it is not the middle classes and just the elites who are going to benefit from this. How are the most marginalized going to benefit from your idea? What you might not have, and you can get through partnerships, is this understanding of, for example, it's really important to consider safety of equipment. I mean, you will have that here, but in some of these contexts, it makes a huge difference. And this is where working with DTI, working with the FCO, and DIFID will really help. But also, you're not just coming in and flying out, you're working with the amazing people who are already in these contexts, and you're working alongside them, adding to their professional development, and actually looking to step out after a while, or be a commercially sustainable model. And
to the stakeholder engagement, you need to understand what stakeholders are participating in any sort of community or territory you're operating in. So having that local presence, that local knowledge, and developing those relationships is is critical for any project success.
And I'll give you a snippet of the kind of local knowledge that makes a difference. So in some settings, girls are not encouraged to be in school. One of our projects said, actually, if you target the fathers, they will then enroll the girls into education. But then you have to target the mothers, because the mothers are responsible for the attendance of the girls in education. So you've got to get them in before you can do something with them. But also, why is school such a traditional model? Can we think about more innovative ways of what schooling means?
Just to encapsulate all of that, one of the things I think also that parties can bring to the table, just step back one, these things are all really important components, but I've got to say from our experience with working in a range of collaborations now and with DIFID, is there's now a lot of accumulated knowledge in effective educational design, i.e. programs that are designed to achieve learning outcomes. But I think the private sector and other players have a lot to bring in that design, and I think a lot was learnt over the last few years about how you can do great things that bring wonderful inputs. You bring education technology and you bring this and you bring that in, and then it fails on reality. And I don't think anyone in this sphere has all the answers yet. So if one of the overall encapsulating envelopes is ultimately preparing an educational design that has a chance of succeeding in those kind of contexts. And so you guys can bring that as well. And I would say at Whizz Education, that's probably, given our experiences now, is the thing I think that's most valuable that we bring to the table. Because we have specialist expertise in our own products in mathematics and individualized learning, but we can bring other partners to the table to cover so much more, because we understand the challenges and the different aspects of pulling something off in that environment to achieve a measurable learning gain.
And again, the parallels here where interactive whiteboards were being introduced into English classrooms. Some teachers were just using them as glorified overhead projectors. So you need to be with them, modeling, coaching, and then going back and revisiting. And that principle applies wherever you are in the world. The other principle I strongly hold dearly to is that the relationship between a teacher and a pupil, whether it's under a tree or in an amazing academy here, is going to be the same. So what happens at the classroom level, what we know about what's good practice there is common. So I did say I was going to leave about 10 minutes for questions. Some of the questions we thought might be ones that you had are there. Richard, do you want to touch on them?
Just cover a few of these, but you might have other questions that you specifically want to know about. I know when we considered engaging, we thought we were potentially too small, but we really felt we had something to offer and we applied anyway. So sometimes blind luck and ignorance helps you. But I would say that regardless of your size, you can participate. Size does influence how you participate. If you're really small, frankly, there is an administrative overhead of participating in these kind of scale programs. Join a consortium, meet partners. That's fairly straightforward. Come and talk to people like me, talk to Asyiyah's team, and they will introduce you. Success here is really all about your ecosystem of partners. You're unlikely to do something effectively alone here. You just don't have the full range. It also depends what kind of value add, what are you bringing to the table? Again, that influences how you participate. What were the challenges are? When you go into consortia and you're trying to achieve things in very challenging environments, one of the important things, and I think that was a big lesson for me, is how do you get that stakeholder alignment? And that can mean internally within your partnerships, because you're all different organizations with your own agendas. How do you align those to achieve learning outcomes while succeeding in your own direction? But stakeholder engagement also means aligning the Ministry of Education, local participants and stakeholders in the communities you're working in. Getting that right is one of the major challenges that any of you will face.
I think on that point, it's not expected that you're going to go and land in a country and go and have a door open at the minister's thing. What you want to do is to sort of have a plan for 3, 4, 5 years of what you want to do and get yourself noticed because of the quality of what you're producing. And that will enable people like ourselves, as the fund manager or DIFID and so forth, to open that door for you.
The really amazing thing about, certainly I can speak from my own experience on this, the very things that were so challenging were ultimately the things that have yielded some of the greatest outcomes from this. So we've learned as an organization how collaborating with an ecosystem of stakeholders achieves the most amazing outcomes. And now one of the things I do as a leader of Whizz Education is actively encouraging the expansion of our ecosystem of partners, collaborators, people who influence what happens on the ground.
Okay, rather than go on more questions, I want a little bit that at PwC we're also interested in supporting an ecosystem of innovators. So if you are interested in being part of a group that's going to be supporting entrepreneurs to grow, please email my colleague Tanya Matthew. It'll be a sort of entrepreneurship development thing. And then Richard and I will be very happy to respond to emails.